Charles, we've got a very special guest joining us today to talk about these 19 bank accounts. We are joined once again by the great Bob Bishop. Bob, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm glad to join co-conspirators here on the Clinton Foundation.
Absolutely. Charles, how are
Well,
you?
I'm great, and it's a pleasure to be in the engine room with you both. Bob, you put out yet another fantastic article that I guess is splashed in various places, and I know your time is very precious, so we'd love to have you tell the tale. What's new with these bank accounts?
Well, you know what Just the News did? They released that Patel document that was supposedly a smoking gun, which it was. It listed everything on the Clinton Foundation they did to do obstruction of justice. And like you, Charles, the biggest thing that I got out of it that popped up was the 19 hidden bank accounts.
Well,
And
yeah, tell us why that is very unusual. You and I and perhaps Jason know just how unusual it is, but maybe the ordinary viewer wouldn't appreciate what you know about business and why this is so crazy.
well, let's kind of drop back a little bit and talk about the Clinton Foundation when I went after the auditors. So I went through a lot of the documents and stuff before filing that successful administrative complaint where they got a consent order signed by BKD. And I remember, Charles, when you and I were kind of working together and I was picking your brain about doing the complaint, you kept always saying there are hidden bank accounts. There are hidden bank accounts everywhere, and they're laundering the money. So when that thing came out and I saw the 19 bank accounts, and it was based on a separate investigation uh, by the Los Angeles DOJ for campaign finance, I thought, wow. So, with 19 bank accounts, all we have to do, the DOJ has to do, is subpoena those banks, get a copy of the bank statements, get a copy of the underlying wires where the money came from, who set up the accounts, go through and get copies of all the checks plus the endorsements, and voila, there you go. There's your conspiracy right there of money laundering. But part of this, in my opinion, is not only graft and bribery and all that, but it also violates the foreign FARA, for registering, because I know that they were moving money back and forth overseas. And I know, Charles, when you were looking at a lot of the initiatives and like the HIV, as far as it went back in the early 2000s, they had all these multitude of bank accounts all over Africa and other places. They had bank accounts in UK, bank accounts in the Netherlands. I mean, this is a web of corruption. And there's a lot of other players just in Bill and Hillary. There's people that were facilitating it. There were people that were probably beneficial of the graft as well. So I think this is kind of maybe a Rosetta Stone that somebody, like Janine Pirro in DC could start assigning a prosecutor to and start doing the subpoenas. I think there'd be a wealth of information.
I agree. Well, tell us a little bit, what is normal practice in keeping books of an enterprise this big? Because at peak, I think it had revenues over 300 million US and who knows how many assets, because you don't really know. This is not a tiny charity, with a retired grandmother as bookkeeper, looking after 100 checks a year. This is a gigantic enterprise, multiple offices. What would be best practice in terms of keeping books and records for something like
Okay.
this?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the bank account structure. I have a background working for like publicly traded companies as a financial officer. So typically, this one company that I worked with, it was a large DME. We had a treasury account where we'd sweep in all the dollars and reinvest it, like in T-bills and things like that. Then we had a payroll account. Then we had a lockbox account where nobody could touch the money. The wires would come into that account. Then we had a payroll account. Then we had a disbursement account. So basically, as a large company, we really only had 5 bank accounts. Now, what was also different between the narrative and my last employer versus the Clinton Foundation, we used very sophisticated financial enterprise software where you booked the numbers and they were what they were. If you were to do adjustments, you had an audit trail. But the Clinton Foundation, I found out when I filed my complaint with the Arkansas Accountancy Board through Wikipedia, no less. I mean, not Wikipedia, but the Podesta
WikiLeaks.
emails on that. I found out that they were using Excel. Excel is not appropriate type of thing. You know, at a minimum, they could have kept the Clinton Foundation on QuickBooks even. But Excel, you can manipulate the records, you can destroy records, and it raised questions. And it was one of my arguments about BKD. They had the Excel spreadsheets and they handed them off to BKD, and all they did was compile the records off this suspect financial system of Excel, and then went ahead and gave it an audit opinion and did the tax returns. So
let's unpack that just a little bit more. So when you're saying enterprise software, what I think you mean is that when you run your books and records using enterprise software, there's a record of every adjustment. Is that right?
absolutely every entry into the books.
Whereas with Excel, you could have some Chinese spy, in the Boston office of the Clinton Foundation with access, to everything, and that spy could go in and manipulate all the records and get out of Excel, and there may or may not be a record of that activity. Is that correct?
That's correct. You really have two type of errors that you could have in Excel. You could have an unintentional error, somebody just deleted the file or sorted it wrong or anything like that. And then you have, under your narrative, an intentional error, irregularity.
Well, and then on the issue of customary practice with the role that an accounting firm plays, tell us a little bit about that. I mean, filing tax returns or information returns for a tax-exempt organization is a task that one firm could carry out, and a separate firm could go and do an audit of the financial statements of the thing. And if you have the same firm doing both, then particularly for a large, complicated firm like this, you are, I think, putting yourself and your trustees at risk of the kind of thing that did happen, I think, with the Clinton Foundation.
Absolutely. And, one of the interesting aspects, looking at the Podesta emails, was a report by BKD. They call it a management letter comments about weaknesses. And they stated in that listing weaknesses of the Excel spreadsheets.
Wow.
So I have to raise the question, why did BKD not back out of that engagement, knowing the risk with such an organization like the Clinton Foundation? It didn't make sense.
I can give you the answer as a guess. The answer is, if you remember when Price Waterhouse was, quote, auditing the Academy Awards, and the CEO was at the Academy Awards, and his sole responsibility was to give the correct winner letter, to the MC, and he was too busy staring at the let's just say anatomical features of one of the actresses, and he gave him the wrong envelope, and they actually announced the wrong winner. So you have these starstruck CEOs of these accounting firms who are very interested in getting, for example, an invitation to the Clinton Global Initiative, where they could be featured and they could run around the room developing business. And, they were the number one, I believe, the number one accounting firm in Little Rock and in Arkansas. And as such, they were heavily conflicted, right? They audited the city of Little Rock. They audited, charities that shared, a charity that shared the Heifer Foundation, that shared premises with, or land area with the Clinton Foundation and many of the major firms. So they were, I think, told what to do. There was no independence. I mean, you're going to cover this shit up for us.
Well, what it made it worse, Charles, if you recall, during this process with the Arkansas Accountancy Board, while they were trying to get him to do a consent agenda, they had labeled me as a conspiracy theorist, not once, but twice.
It's outrageous.
But what makes it even worse is they had made veiled threats about using the AICPA to discipline me. So
this is outrageous, Bob.
Yeah, but who was the AICPA chairman? None other than
Eric.
Eric Hansen, who's the chief
Yeah,
operating officer of BKD.
the guy who
I
hangs
mean,
Yeah.
out with the tiger.
so talk about corruption.
Hmm.
Right.
And,
Bob, let me ask you this,
it's
if I may,
outrageous.
because to that point about Excel, isn't it also true that Excel is so super open-ended because it's really designed to allow anybody to create any kind of spreadsheet that they need, so you can edit it ad nauseum, whereas I've never dealt with the type of software that you're talking about, but I can only presume that it's designed to adhere to certain accounting protocols where you can't go and edit the whole thing up like that.
Correct. And with Excel, you can go in there and throw away transactions. You can do all kinds of things. Or you could create a pseudo set of books and where you got two sets of books,
Right. Well,
right?
right. And actually, this now that you bring this up, one of the things I've been doing out here, other than playing tennis, is going deeply into the weeds and looking at, for example, the Form 990s that are up on the Clinton Foundation website and comparing them with Form 990s for the same year that are in different states, and they're different. So, this is a team. Andrew Kessel, when he was CFO for a long period of time, this is a team that believes it's okay to say, all right, this is the real result for what we did this year. Let's show this over here to North Carolina, but let's show something different to Ohio, and something different to New York, and something different to the United Kingdom, and something different to, the Kingdom of Lesotho or wherever they are. And that's precisely the opposite of what books and records are supposed to be. You have one set of books and records, and it must foot the balance sheet. Changes in the balance sheet must agree with what you say the net increase or decrease in net assets are in the statement of activities. Cash flow statement must foot. Footnotes must make sense, and you must include all of your consolidated results on a consistent basis year to year. So the best way to teach accounting, I would say, is to take this package of garbage that has been presented by the Clinton Foundation from inception, and begin, your elementary accounting, showing why this is so bad and so many mistakes were made, and you should do precisely the opposite of this. Not that
Contrast accounting, Charles?
Exactly, a study in contrast.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit more about that management letter. Is that something that can be shared publicly?
Yes, I've got it somewhere. Uh, what's funny is BKD, and typically with those type of audits, they call it a single audit where you get government funds, which in 2010 and 11 they did get government grants.
Right.
So they're required to do a special single audit and talk about where there's violations in the grants, where there are any weaknesses in the books, and that's where they made the comment about the Excel using that as a system. So pretty sad situation. One of the comments I would have made is Andrew Kessel was not competent enough to be the CFO of a large organization. He had no accounting financial background. If I
Well,
remember
that's why he was.
correctly, wasn't he like a bond trader, mortgage bond trader or
Yeah,
something?
and a bad one at that. I mean, he was a guy who was working for a big firm on the trading floor, and decided to go into the venture capital business in Arkansas because he had a friend who was doing that. Then he went to work on the Wes Clark campaign for president, and when that flamed out, somebody said, "Hey, this guy's dumb enough to be the CFO and not ask any questions at the Clinton Foundation. Let's put him on a pedestal over here. Let's save his sorry ass."
Yeah.
And he stayed in that position for a long time. I mean, a forthright person coming in from the outside to this mess would have said, I have no interest in this. No interest. Well, you might even have gone so far as to report Bruce Lindsay and Bill Clinton to the FBI or the appropriate authorities outside of Arkansas. I have multiple books about Arkansas and the degree to which the FBI there was corrupt, going back decades. So, that's another part of the problem. At this stage, when you and I and Jason started on this years ago, I was disinclined to believe in official conspiracies. Forget about conspiracy theory. I mean, that the government would conspire State, local, federal, international governments would conspire with a crooked charity to promote its existence when it didn't really exist legally, and then to use it as a mechanism to siphon money to the political actors involved. I was disinclined to believe that could be possible. This is living proof. This is just what they are doing. Even right now, this is what they're doing.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed, Charles, when going through the various tax returns, they had an extraordinary high audit and tax preparation fees because of the way the books were done.
Right.
So if they had had a good enterprise accounting system, there's different ones like Oracle or Hyperion, those audit fees would be much cheaper. Now, you remember in 2015, they had to go back and restate 3 years of the tax returns.
Right.
And when I looked at the tax and preparation fees of all the firms associated with that, $2.7 million. Big red flag. And if you recall, they said, oh, we just made some simple restatements on the tax returns. When I went through it, I found 200 plus changes in every year, material changes. That tells you what the books were.
Well, they redid the Form 990s, the informational returns, the IRS, and what they showed on those were radically different than what had been shown on the audits. So they redid the tax forms, but they left the audits that were obviously wrong out in the public domain. Didn't correct them.
Yeah, one of the arguments I had with the Arkansas Accountancy Board that if BKD was reputable, as well as maybe PwC, BKD at a minimum through ethics, they should have pulled their audit opinions.
Right.
They did not. And in previous years, they had one, I think it was 28 or 2009. What happened there is they just had a restatement between program expenses and revenue of 2%.
Right.
So in the case when they did all those restatements, the restatements within the various categories of the balance sheet and net revenue statement was much more than 2%.
Right.
So they were hypocrites. It should have pulled the audit opinions and made a statement to that. But hey, when your chief operating officer is the AICPA chairman, I guess anything can go, right?
It's sad. I'm not an accountant and you are a retired accountant, that the profession used to take itself pretty seriously. And maybe it still takes itself seriously, but it shouldn't, because it needs to be completely the management structures of the remaining. It's it's an oligopoly at this point, right? You've got the big four. What's their share of U.S. Accounting revenue? It's probably a pretty big share.
Yeah, and you got more and more consolidation going on now. One of the things that's real interesting about the big four, they're some of the biggest lobbyists in Washington, D.C.
Of course.
So they make a lot. Even these big four, they're buying law firms now.
Are they really?
Yeah, some of the smaller ones are being bought out by private equity. Unheard of in my era.
Private equity. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. One wonders how much of this accounting function could be done by AI.
Well, but wait a second. Help less sophisticated people like me understand what the implications of private equity buying accounting firms. What does that mean to a regular person?
Well, the problem, good question, Jason. The problem that you have with that, their bottom line isn't about ethics or integrity, it's about profit, right? So at what point do you sell out your integrity and ethics for profit?
Right. On Wall Street in the olden days, I talked about this. I was a partner at a medium-sized law firm. And the way it worked then is that you had to keep all of your publicly traded securities in an account in that firm. And to keep us honest, the partners honest, our protection if the firm went under was only for a portion of what we had in our accounts. That's step one. Step two, your capital in the firm, if you hit a big hole, you have to have money outside the firm to put back in the firm to save that capital. So those two things took even the most risk-prone partner into a place where you're pretty cautious and conservative. If you go from that approach to selling the firm out, let's say to a big publicly traded competitor, and suddenly you have all of your capital back in your pocket, liquid. You may or may not have the same restrictions that you had as a private firm, and you're swinging for the fences on every transaction because you've got nothing, no downside. Yeah, let's try this crazy idea over here. Let's try a leverage buyout of a savings bank, which is actually something some idiot at the firm tried to do. I had to fire the client because it was a preposterous idea. So, private equity firms, the accounting profession used to be a profession. It used to be, there's honor in it, and you're above the fray. You could tell your client, you could pick your clients. I don't want you, I don't trust you, I don't think you should be a client. When you introduce private equity, what that means is that the firm buying into the accounting firm is telling you right up front, we're going to sell this firm, ideally in 2.5 years. Maybe we'll wait till 7, but we're certainly not in this forever. We're going in at this price, and we've promised our investors that we can deliver high rates of return. So you got to gin up your revenues, you got to cut your expenses, maybe loosen these controls that are expensive, and we're going to flip this thing and we're going to make money. And that incentive, I think, is inconsistent with the accounting profession.
Well, the other problem, Charles, is private equity. They get to determine what the value of the enterprise is, not what a free market is. And as you quite well know, you've made some comments, and I think you may have published some articles that, like Harvard, what is the real value of their private equity on their large endowment fund?
Right. Actually, there was interesting. There's a guy who's now died who very controversially in the 70s and 70s pushed Yale into being a very active, the Yale endowment, into being a very active investor in private equity, way ahead of the pack. Yale was criticized. He was criticized. Yale was criticized. And Yale's endowment just went up gangbusters. The beauty of that from an endowment standpoint is you're in the business as the president of the university and others constantly asking for more money. You need a new gym, you need a new library, this and that. And so if you own public securities and they go up in value, the endowment will look bigger. And it's kind of tough to go around the country and say, I've got a $50 billion endowment, I need more money. So in a private equity fund, you don't mark it up until you realize. So it's a nice way of, if you find very, as Yale did, superb private equity, honest and superb private equity guys, it's nice. You value it at cost. It's higher in value from the endowment fundraising standpoint. It's protected and will do well. But you can say, look, I've got money. It's illiquid. I need more money. And it makes the argument easier. So Yale was the first to do that. Harvard copied it belatedly, but they did it stupidly. They were later into the game. Yale was backing, KKR and people like that. Maybe it wasn't KKR, but firms early when when the markets were less perfect and there were more undervalued things to buy and improve. Harvard got into it later, and they got into it with scoundrels, including George Soros. And actually, they concocted a plan with George W. Bush, who's not exactly even a 40-watt light bulb, to try to milk the distressed energy landscape in 1986 with Harkin Energy. So Harvard made some very bad investments, and then anything Yale could do, they thought they could do better. They pushed the envelope in private equity when things were more expensive. And now you're right, Bob, they could be in serious trouble here.
Yeah. Well, Trump's going to sign that one executive order about 401ks and pension plans putting in private equity. So I guess the solution is to dump it on the chumps and the public, right?
Yeah,
that doesn't sound good.
No, it is.
When you go back and you take apart, for example, Warren Buffett's track record, his track record as advertised is bogus. He's just looking at the increase in the book value per share of his company. That other people he's trying to compete with, they're looking at their realized rates of return on investment. That's not what he has. But in the early days, and a lot of his big successes come from the early days, he wasn't competing against a robust private equity field with deep pockets. So now prices, entry prices on investments. When I was doing it in the early 80s, I frequently bought companies for 4 times EBITDA. When actually then we were buying them at 4 times EBIT, like really tiny, and companies that had cash piles, right? So when you're buying companies at 12 times EBITDA, which might be 15 times EBIT, and you're doing it in club deals, our deals were mostly, our firm did it, right? Later another firm did it. But when the market is frothy, the firms get together and they say, we don't want to bid against each other. Let's 7 of us buy this company at this price, at an artificially high price. And it's just all the signs of a dangerous top.
Mm-hmm. One of the other disturbing things that are going on in the accounting profession, and it happened to my son, he was a CPA doing tax work for Energy Transfer, a very large pipeline company. So the tax department was outsourced into a service center with PwC. So if you're the auditor and then you're doing the taxes, you could have a little bit of a conflict. I mean, they're taking a bigger bite of the apple, and these businesses getting very much enmeshed into the business.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
good.
The whole landscape has changed for the profession.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember in 1989, I was on a team. We were trying to buy a business for $1.2 billion. And it consisted of 9 separate, big businesses, actually. And the proposed capitalization plan, we were going to put in $75 million and borrow the difference, right? It's kind of a super leveraged structure. And, so I asked, I think it was Cooper's and Lyran. I asked the guy on our team, we're relying on this audit here. How comfortable should we be about whether these big numbers in the audit are real? I mean, are they close to accurate? With cash, you can be comfortable, but anything else, it could be 10% off. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm putting up $1.2 billion in total. If one number can be 10% off, then $75 million doesn't sound like the right amount of equity to go into this mess. Fortunately, we didn't win the auction. Mm-hmm. But, the accounting profession, again, this is another area where the work that perhaps you did starting out as an accountant, the work I did starting out as an investment banker, shuffling paper around these gigantic spreadsheets, AI should be able to make that process a lot tighter, quicker, and less expensive. So why do accounting fees need to go up exactly?
Other than maybe the liability of
right.
From the standpoint, there's an error. Yeah, you got, I've always thought that maybe the best way to underwrite the accounting professions with the insurance companies, right?
Yeah.
So the insurance company gets paid for the audit. They select the auditor, and through the payments for the premiums on that insurance, they would use a portion of that to pay the CPA firm.
Yeah, could be.
Right.
Could be, but there's certainly, I mean, in the case of the Clinton Foundation, you and I focus mostly on the numbers, but when you get to the law and the letters, the articles, the bylaws, they don't have any. As my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, but to make changes in articles of incorporation, you have to have amendments. And the articles of incorporation, I'm told, and I believe it's the case, are superior to the bylaws, meaning if there's a conflict, the articles govern, and there can't be a conflict. You can't say in the articles that the thing is going to be run by trustees and then adopt these bylaws that you don't show to a bunch of regulators to concentrate control in the hands of Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton, and then later just Bill and Chelsea, and now maybe back to Hillary in the mix. You're not allowed to do that. And yet this thing has been operating with broken financials, broken legal documents since October 23rd, 1997. And the effort that you tried in Arkansas, they got a wrist slap, basically, because the Arkansas.
But I'd add the states have done a poor job. Earlier this year, I made a run at North Carolina because I'd had other lucks with other nonprofits. And I very much laid out the fact that it wasn't a legitimate nonprofit, showing the problems that they changed over the Bill and Hillary Clinton Foundation, and it was totally bogus. And
What'd they say?
They denied it.
Denied it.
Well,
See,
yeah.
well, it's interesting. Excuse me if I can interrupt for a second, because when along the lines of what Bob is saying, even just right now, Googling Clinton Foundation 19 bank accounts, Kash Patel. I mean, the guy's the director of the FBI. He's declassifying this. And look who's reporting on it. Patch. I've never heard of that. KMVU in Medford and BizPac Review. That's it. Under news in Google.
BizPac Review covered the Clinton Foundation extensively.
But I'm just saying, we don't see Wall Street Journal. We don't see ABC News. We don't see CNN. They're trying to ignore it.
Well,
oh, yeah.
You know what's interesting looking at it when you try to search that? Why didn't AI pop up like it normally does on Google?
I switched it to news. If we go to all, it will give us that.
Yeah.
Well, you're right. There is no AI under all.
Well, I find that very unusual because now when I run anything,
right,
searches, the AI pops up, gives me an additional narrative.
Overview. Right.
Yeah.
Not doing that. Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
This is even on all. It's just giving us really Facebook, and it's just they're trying to suppress it.
What if you put in Bishop? Is it?
That's going to give you even less, I would think.
But does it even give his article?
Yeah, I've got it posted in 2 different webs, and then you had Joe Hoff pick it up too.
It does not give you Bob's. Oh no, there it is. Yeah, American Thinker.
Yeah, but Joe Hoff didn't show up, and neither did Sonar 21.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they're not trying to tell too many people about it.
Yeah, and this idea that you can use the phrase conspiracy theorist,
right?
And that's a dog whistle. I mean, the conspiracy theorists are Jake Tapper, Margaret Brennan, Martha Raddatz, Dean Backett at the New York Times. Well, I'm talking about in the media for the moment. Yeah. I mean, the crooks are Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, George Bush, Matt Schlapp, a long list in the swamp. But the accounting profession has sunk to new lows. We don't. The legacy media is the stories in the Weekly World News, if that thing still exists, are more credible than the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and they're not very credible to begin with. And then the example is clear, right? If you're a Boy Scout and you're going to not even have the appearance of a conflict of interest, let alone break the law, you're a chump. Look at Chelsea, look at Bill, look at Hillary, look at Barack Obama with his 4 mansions, Bush's with all their ill-gotten gains. They didn't play by the rules. They're swanning around the world in private jets, multiple mansions, fancy parties. Their children and grandchildren and other people just get jobs that other people would die to get. They just get them by right. They don't accomplish anything, and they make more money. This is the example that has been set since 1989, and it's a do or die mission for Trump now. Either you break this, and the number of stories I'm seeing, and Jason, I think you would maybe fall into this camp. The number of people who reflexively say now nothing's going to happen to these people. They got away with it. You can't indict Barack Obama. You can't indict the Clintons. You can't indict the Bushes. Get used to it. Now that's something I heard when I fought the Bush family from a very powerful, and I'm not going to say who it is, person who told me, give up.
One slight correction. I wouldn't say you can't. I'm saying I'm convinced they won't.
Right. No, I'm not. No, I know. I'm not denigrating your position either. But I'm just saying, I was told by one extremely powerful person that the Bushes are too powerful to, they stole money from you, so just give up. Don't forget about it. I said, fuck that. got the money back. So, this is an example that the full story here needs to come out. What did these people do? What have they been doing? Not simply with the Clinton Foundation, October 23, 1997 forward, but going back into the very beginning of their lives. For how long have these people been cheating, lying, and stealing, occupying high positions of power at crucial moments in world history? I mean, unfortunately for them, they won't care because eventually they'll die, but their records are going to be poured over. And in time, the carcasses that they have created across the planet, particularly under Barack Obama when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State with the Arab Spring and all these color revolutions, the precedents that it's okay to use government resources to persecute your political enemies and to, sink Bernie Sanders like the sodden Subway sandwich that he is in a pretend set of primaries that occurred in 2016, which were rigged beginning in August of 2015. We really want to stand for that. That's what we want America to be, a place where, a limited number of corrupt oligarchs decide who are the actors on top of the political pile, who gets to steal how much money, who gets prosecuted, who gets protected. We really want to be a banana republic? That's the question for Trump right now.
We're there right now, aren't we? We've got to dig out of it.
Well, my problem is I just don't think Bondi or Patel have the ability to do that heavy lifting.
I agree, Bob. So,
Well, plus, they got a staff around them that's totally corrupt. Where do you start? You almost have to rebuild the entities.
Yeah. And we'll see. Well, we will see what happens here with, what Trump does going forward. I mean, in contrast to the situation, Attorney General and FBI, I'm very impressed with Marco Rubio and what he did on Sunday, the Sunday shows. And he destroyed Margaret Brennan and
he's
then went
on camera for sure.
Yeah. But
listen, sorry to interrupt, Charles, but Bob, I know you've got maybe limited time with us tonight. We're going to make our way over to the First Amendment Forum and carry on for viewers on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com and subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Was there anything else, Bob, that you wanted to cover before we go over there?
Not really.
Well, I appreciate you joining us. It was great reporting, and it's always good to hear your insights and expertise. Charles?
Yeah, thanks so much, Bob. That's fantastic work. And let's hope, the FBI moves on your FOIA request.
Well, we'll see. I'll keep you abreast. They've got 20 working days.
There you go.
They'll come up with an excuse.
Watch that clock. And people should follow Bob on X. He is Real Bob Bishop. And he is the real deal. If you are interested in the details of these scandals from the standpoint of a forensic investigator and a guy with decades of experience in high-level corporate accounting, Bob is the go-to guy. Follow him. He's there in Texas. And how is George doing with anything going on more with the migrant centers and all that?
Well, what's funny is I've had people contact me and asking how are things going in San Antonio. The migrant center is shut down. It's gated.
Huh.
All the migrants or illegal aliens that came through San Antonio are now in these blue states and blue cities. So we've really calmed down. And so George and I really haven't done much in the way of the open border. I mean, the border's shut down now, so we're not seeing much.
Well, but you guys were at the tip of the spear on that. So thanks again for joining us, Bob, and stay with us, everybody. We'll be back with the First Amendment Forum, more to discuss about these 19 bank accounts. Stay with us.